This is a video on knowledge dynamics and educated life dynamics. It consists of 8 points. First of all, we have the capabilities of highly educated people. There are 54 ways of rising to the top of nearly any field. I call them the 54 excellent sciences. And they were produced from a data set of 8,000 plus people from 41 nations and 63 professions that my MBAs and I interviewed and sent questionnaires to for 7 years, about 20 years ago. One of those ways of rising to the top of any field was being a highly educated person. And so then we got 150 of those 8,000 people who rose to the top by being highly educated, and we asked them what that was and what capabilities they had that if they weren't highly educated they wouldn't have. And so they defined educatedness for us empirically. This is great because it means we're not defining it philosophically or religiously or politically. Number 2, we need and we can now create a new industry of publishing of expert and classic readings of texts. And this is really valuable because really good readers of a text will know more about the author's structure and limitations than the author himself does. And we can avoid certain problems of derivative or copyright law by summarizing and naming the points and ordering the points in ways that are better than the original author did. So we're adding value. It's in effect a new work inspired by a previous work, but improving it in 3 fundamental cognitive dimensions of count, naming, and ordering. Number 3, we need to be educating people for comprehensiveness because, to be honest, we're creating narrower and narrower people in narrower and narrower subfields and professions, while all of our problems are falling across many of those narrow things. And we're not creating people as broad as our problems are. Nor are we creating a means of scaling up and crowdsourcing solutions that scales as quickly and as vast as our problems are. Number 4, we need to do the number 3, we're going to need to create people that are able to work across boundaries. But when you cross boundaries of fields and professions, you have to recompile knowledge from the favorite formats of profession A into the favorite formats of profession B. Now, not a lot of people are good at doing that without great loss of points. Five, that becoming an educated person and how you act involves doing a lot of culture work. In fact, it means becoming an adult in a strict sense, not in a government sense of smoking, having sex, and drinking, and driving a car and voting. But in a strict sense, becoming an adult in the old ancient meaning of having outgrown all of your initial factory settings. You were born male, but you learn how to think femalely and feel femalely. You were born French, but you learn how to think American and act American. You were born and raised to be a medical doctor, but you learn to think as an architect and act as an architect. Overcoming your initial factory settings is adulthood. And wielding with a full knowledge of their limitations and biases and blind spots, whatever positives and tools you have, is adult acting. And by that definition, there are not many adults in our world today, an awful lot of 50-year-old bodies with adolescent minds in them. Number 6, there are different ways of formatting knowledge, and most of the arguments of our world and fights of our world are from among people with the same knowledge but who prefer different ways of formatting it. This is really tragic. If they could let go of their formats and see that these concepts map onto their concepts pretty well, then there would be no need to hate their concepts because their concepts are really my concepts, formatted differently. But people aren't trained in this in colleges and universities and in their professions, and they don't know how to switch from one set of knowledge formats to another. There are about 21 common ways of formatting knowledge. This came from expert system builders in the 1980s. Number 7, there are 64 ways that organizations learn. Now, to be honest, this is a matter of granularity that you prefer to operate at. You could just as easily and validly say there are 4 ways, or 16 ways, or for that matter, 27 ways or 128 ways. But there are 64 ways organizations learn, which you get if you read the top 200 books on it in the research literature, and marking their points by similarity and grouping those groups and grouping those groups of groups, and you end up with 64 highest level groups of 64 ways of that organizations learn that encompass all the other more detailed ways that organizations learn. And number 8, replacing prose and with fractal page forms, replacing meetings with scientific rules of order, and replacing discussions with stratified respondings. That means undoing the most mundane fundamental interfaces of intellectual life and updating them. So you're using interfaces that are not 1,000 years old.